So for me, it wasn't actually books that were my first encounter, to literature. Books weren't actually my gateway, but what was or were actually stories. There were African folk tales. I had a great dose of it while growing up as a young child. Almost every evening, we sit down amongst the elders, and they will regale us with stories, short stories uh, about the ancient, mostly because my area actually came from Benin City or Edo.
Yes.
So the stories about the Oba, the what we call then the Uredo Kingdom, the things that happened in that old Benin Empire, they were largely the stories that actually formed our growing up years, when elders would tell them about the stories about Ogwana, the giant, the dealings of the Oba, various Obas, various, a lot of stories from that era. So, we sit down and we listen and drink in these stories, into our being. And then the other one was also the meetings which the elders held. My father was a spokesman for the community. So most of the time the meetings were held in our place. And so you listen to these elders talking, you listen to them using proverbs, you listen to them using words, just the way, Achebe aptly described in his Things Fall Apart when he said, words were the palm, proverbs were the palm oil with which words are eaten.
Yes.
So, I was uh, um, an apt student, I should say, or pupil of that particular, a school of tutoring or mentoring. So I listened to those stories, I listened to those meetings, the elders using one proverb to weaving proverbs in a conversation. And for me, it was so thrilling, it was so exciting, And then, of course, I entered the primary school. And I think it was in primary 3 that I got introduced properly to the written text in terms of literature, back then. I had a teacher, one Mr. Andy Caro, who were to do a particular event in the school, and they needed some kind of performance. So he brought this poem, copied it on the board. I don't know how he singled me out, and he said I was going to perform it. I had never done it before. So I read the poem. That's about 7, 6, 7, 8 lines. For a book. That is the title of the poem. So I didn't know how to memorize the poem back then, but I did somehow. And on that particular occasion, I stood before the entire school, the teachers and everyone present, and I recited the poem. In that stage of innocence. But it stuck, as a matter of fact. It became part of me. And so eventually, back then, it used to be school readers. You read the story of, I think, Mr. Ade and the parents, traveling around Nigeria and something like that. And then we entered secondary school. And then there was a lady teacher introduced Is It Goes to School? That was one of the first texts we read in class 1 back then. And I was actually blown away, because I'm a village boy. And this was a boy in the village who was, going to the school for the first time, and then the challenges he had. And it was exciting. So from there, we got introduced to the Supremacy, series, An African Night Entertainment. Which other one now? Yes. So from there, we began to, as we grew up by primary, by class 3, there was Things Fall Apart happened. Now that became almost like the explosion, because never before had one thought that anybody could write a book like things fall apart, because the stories, even the way the shared narration was such that actually mimicked those village meetings of which we used to listen in as children. The way the elders would talk and throw in proverbs, and the way they would weave words. It was an exact translation into the book called Things Fall Apart. And then eventually also, so from there I began to explore on my own, reading beyond what the school texts offered. And so one of those other books that I'd read outside of the usual school curriculum was Flowers and Shadows by Ben Ogre. From there, I moved on to his second novel, The Landscapes Within. And for me, that was like, wow, this is a new world entirely. And I began to lap up virtually every book that came my way. So much so that I had to travel a distance, something like from Oshodi to Badagry, to register in the library, the only library, and then the Ozoro Library eventually as in Delta State. So I could borrow books when I didn't have enough money to buy ones on my own. So that was how my love and fascination for books started. And of course, from there, it became an exploration, a never-ending exploration. Of course, you can't forget poets too. Poets like J.P. Clark, for instance, Night Rain. Night Rain, for me, I think probably when he wrote it, because our house back then was a thatched house, a mud house and a thatched house. So, and when my dad is probably late in putting a new new roof on that mud house, and the rains come, of course, what you experience is exactly night rain, especially when it's night and it rains. And of course, we lived in a riverine area, and you can be sure the rains, were something else. So that is how exactly the way night rain was how we lived, until a few years later, the roof, the thatch roof was changed for zinc roof, and then we escaped from, the raindrops falling like mangoes or oranges on the vats and bins that mother had placed on the path of the raindrops, And then, like Tade mentioned, Shundari. Yes, I also encountered him, a little bit early, and I never knew. Anybody could write like that. But that was something really fascinating. The words were simple, but the sheer way he strung them together, the very rhythmic and almost sensual way he brought them, especially his Song of the Marketplace. I think that was my first introduction to. Waiting for Laughter. Yes, I remember now. Waiting for Laughter and then Song of the Marketplace. Those were the first two, poetry collections of the Yoshida that I read, and they were extraordinary. And then, of course, even With Not Child by Ngugi Wationgo, which we read as a text in secondary school, was also a very fascinating, the life of a village boy who was going to school in the city for the first time, and then the Mau happened, and that bloody conflict. It was really so extraordinary. And of course, upwards, you begin to encounter, masters like Shoyinka proper, Brother Jero, the Lion and the Jewel, and then interpreters. Those ones. And then even outside, particularly this man from India, the man who wrote the Satanic Verses. I think that was my first encounter with him, and it was almost like reading the interpreters of Shoyinka. But it was very interesting. And then I read the other one, Midnight's Children, which for me is one of those memorable, fantastic books that everyone should read. And of course, Ikwo mentioned love in terms of cholera, which I just read. In fact, I find this is the best time to see what the cholera was, in comparison with what we were having at the time, and of course it is an amazing book.